I call the honourable member for Fadden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Australian Military Court, by virtue of background and history, was established in 2007 in legislation that had bipartisan support by both sides of the parliament. The court's establishment followed a series of Senate committee reports over a number of years recommending extensive changes to the system of military justice. On the 26th of August 2009, however, the High Court of Australia handed down its decision in the case of Lane versus Morrison. The case challenged the constitutional validity of the Australian Military Court. The High Court found unanimously that the provisions of the DFDA 1982 establishing the Australian Military Court were indeed invalid because the Australian Military Court purported to exercise the judicial power of the Commonwealth but did not meet the requirements of Chapter 3 of the Constitution. The current interim military justice system was established following the High Court's decision. The interim military justice system was established under the Military Justice (Interim Measures Act No. 1, 2009, and we were told by the then Minister, second out of a line of 3 Defence Ministers from this government over 4 years, we were told by Minister Faulkner when it was introduced that rectifying the military legal problem would be afforded the government's highest priority. Well, Mr Speaker, if it was afforded the government's highest priority, then why are we back here 2 years later extending the provisions of the Interim Military Justice Bill? See, I was here under the former member for Griffiths' almighty reign, where he had wars on everything: war on Indigenous disadvantage, war on obesity, war on unemployment, war on inflation. It got to a point over a month there were 10 wars that he was fighting across the domestic continent of Australia. But not content just to stop at the war fighting, he then said, my number 1 priority is dealing with obesity, my first priority is dealing with X, and he had 10 number 1 priorities. Is it any wonder? Is it any wonder that 12 months till, in 2 days' time, 12 months to the date in 2 days' time, the Labor Party rose up in historic form and knifed him. Not because he was behind in the polls, but frankly because they hated him. Statement of fact, 10 wars, 10 number 1 priorities, none of them going anywhere, and here we have another highest priority military justice. 2 years ago, it's our highest priority, the minister said. And when a Minister of Defence speaks in the House of Representatives, the world listens. Not only is there a $26 billion budget, add on $12 billion in terms of vets, you're talking about $38 billion worth of expenditure, and the senior elected representative of a middle power with significant regional interest. When the Minister for Defence speaks, the world listens. And when he says it's his highest priority, we would expect that to be honoured. But then again, 12 months ago, when the government had lost its way, the Prime Minister outlined 3 of her highest priorities. And where are we on those highest priorities? Where are we on the issue of asylum seekers? We had East Timor, had Manus Island, and now we've got Malaysia announced almost 8 weeks ago, and we're nothing. Highest priority. Where are we on the carbon tax? Highest priority. Where are we on the MRRT? Highest priority. It seems whenever this government rolls out this contemptuous line of it's our highest priority, hoping that indeed the nation listens and says, well, perhaps the government is interested and this is important to them. It seems every time something is the highest priority, it ends up nowhere. And keeping in line the issues of military, in 2007, look at the member for Moreton who came in 2007. In 2007, the government said in the election campaign one of its highest priorities was to address the fairness of the indexation of defence pensions. And where are we after 4 years of that high priority? Member for Moreton, where are we? Member for Fremantle, I look across there. Where are we on that high priority? In fact, to save your sorry bacon, the Coalition introduced a private member's bill in the Senate, because when we went to the election to say it was our highest priority, we actually acted on it. We actually stood up and acted on the highest priority. We put a private member's bill into the Senate, and where was the Labor Party voting against it? Which is odd, because I put a motion into the House asking the House to reaffirm its commitment to the fair indexation of military pensions and to support the Senate bill, and it passed through on the voices. Where was the Labor Party then in dealing with this high priority? So as we address this issue of military justice and the interim military justice, let everyone know that we are here because this government is completely, intolerably, utterly incapable of exercising a commitment to what the Defence Minister said was the highest priority. Not just a high priority, the highest priority. Funny how priorities change, and here we are 2 years' time. Now, clearly the Minister's statement was about buying time for a government that had lost its way, so we were told 12 months ago. But a government that doesn't have a clear military strategy on how to deal with the issue here of military justice. But it also builds on so many other missteps and misfortunes this government has created when it has come to our fighting force. Drag kicking and screaming to put counter-rocket artillery and mortar into the battlefield, the CRAN system, originally on the DCP for 2018 until the coalition pressured it, and 43 force protection measures went into Afghanistan to further protect our troops. Drag, kicking and screaming there. You were told about the issues with the air warfare destroyer, but still no action until it's sprayed across the front of the papers. We're seeing the handed back in defence budget terms of over $2.5 billion because apparently the government can't spend it. Yet in the Howard years, average of something like 30 projects went through 1 and 2 pass approvals. What has the government been doing in the last 1, 2 and 3 years in Kennard reform pass 1 and 2 approvals? 7, 8, 9, a third less than the Howard government, and you wonder why there's an underspend out there in defence industry. Everything this government touches in terms of defence is the opposite to the Midas touch. We're now at a point where Force 2030 is unachievable. Something like $14 billion worth of defence procurement has been pushed to the right, some of it into years that have not been disclosed, so this government can try and stand next financial year, as in 12-13, and say, look, we've got a wafer-thin surplus. A surplus built on the back of destroying Australian defence industry and deferring $14 billion worth of projects. One more example in a long litany of defence failures, and this is another one. The Defence Minister said fixing up the Australian military court issue was his highest priority, and he said it 2 years ago, and here we are back again. I could use the Treasurer's, and using the Prime Minister's word, the Treasurer's hyperbole about how appalling this is, but let the record speak for itself. 2 years later, we're back again. This bill is a stopgap measure. It's necessary, of course, in order to provide for the ongoing remuneration, along with other entitlements of statutory office holders, ostensibly the Chief Judge Advocate and 2 Judge Advocates, each of whom are full-time members of the Australian Defence Force. The amendment, at least at face value, is necessary because Schedule 3 of the Military Justice Interim Measures Act No. 1, 2009, that bill 2 years ago, that schedule currently provides a fixed tenure for the statutory office holders, the Chief Judge Advocate and 2 Judge Advocates, of up to 2 years that will expire in September 2011. This bill amends Schedule 3 of this Act to provide for the appointment, remuneration and entitlement arrangements for an additional 2 years or until the Minister of Defence puts in place the legislation to establish a properly constituted court. But if it takes 2 years to move just to reaffirm the interim measures bill, which was the highest priority, frankly, I'm not holding my breath on the government's capacity, capability, courage, conviction to actually get a proper bill before the House. 12 months since Fundamental Injustice Day, 12 months since the government lost its way, the Prime Minister's 3 priorities, her highest priorities, are still nowhere. So all we've learned is the Prime Minister's highest priorities simply don't get any priority, and the Minister of Defence's highest priorities get zero priority. And that is a fabulous analogy for this wretched government. Moribund, rotten, incapable of actually setting an agenda or a vision for the nation. Setting priorities it doesn't keep. Setting agendas it has no hope of ever reaching. It's disappointing that we once again find ourselves in passing another stopgap measure. If I can read Senator Faulkner's second reading speech, when he spoke that this is an interim measure until the government can legislate for a Chapter 3 court. The question for the government is, when will we see the legislation for a Chapter 3 court? Numerous military professionals have come out opposing some concepts of where the government's going. No ostensible discussion paper to provide advice as to direction of where it might head. No comments out there with respect to where we might go.